Hi, I'm Tip Toland, and I'm going to be demonstrating how to make a clay head with special attention to proportion and the planes and how they refer back to the skull. So the next thing I want to say is that it's always nice to work in a happy environment. What I do is work on a piece of 3/4 inch plywood cut in quarters, and I put the flange directly in the center. This particular piece of pipe, which would be down into the torso, could be any length you want, depending on how far down you want to sculpt. But in this case, this first piece is going to be 4 inches. Then there's a 45-degree elbow. The next piece, which is the neck piece, is 3.5 inches. Then a 90-degree elbow, and then this is a 5-inch piece of pipe. So I always want to make sure I have clear measurements. This way I can always find the armature. I can always find the way through this midline and come up 8 inches, and I'll always be able to know where this 90 is and also this 45. So these are my tools. We'll start with a cutting wire, just a basic cutting wire, cut the clay. I love these big ribs. These are flexible and very coarse grit. Then I graduate as I keep refining the sculpture to these less intense toothed ribs until you get to the very finest tooth. And then I go to these more plastic ribs, mostly for burnishing and smoothing. And these brushes are part of the smoothing effect too. They kind of make the whole head look more cohesive. This is my favorite tool of all tools. This is this beautiful modeling tool from China. It's made out of this beautifully hard wood. Of course, I always want a fettling knife every time I am near clay. These are skewers. I'll show you what I do with them in a minute. A needle tool. All of these loop tools are good for gouging out eye sockets, and they're particularly useful when I cut the top of the head off for scooping out all of the clay. So I'm going to start by wrapping the pipe with clay. I want to get it on there as tight as I can to minimize any air pockets. So I'm going to be making a kind of a generic Northern European male. The first thing after you've wrapped the pipe is to find your measurement points again. And that should be the middle of the 45-degree elbow. That 45-degree elbow is our sternal notch. And I make sure that that's a key measuring point. So, because from there we can determine how high the chin and how deep the clay is on top of the pipe. So this is all the clay depth I have so far. So we're going to usually go a little bit deeper, about 1.5 inches. This is important so that when we hollow it out, we don't go through. There's plenty of thickness in the walls of the clay. Then we are going to measure up again 8 to find the 90-degree and put a skewer there. Now I know we won't have. Now that 8 inches up is only where the pipe is. We can determine a different chin height. Right now we have just a very little bit of clay on that chin. So we're going to put some more over it. I want you to keep in mind that basically the skull is kind of a ball. If you look at the very back, it's sort of, this is the ball of the cranium. This is about as tall as it is wide. And then it's almost like, if you went halfway back, like a mask hangs on this ball. So now what I do is use my big rib and just really integrate. I've been hammering it on with my fist so as to pound it so I don't get any air pockets. And now I just want to integrate. This kind of is wonderful because it lets you score the clay, which is scratch it up, move clay around, and because it's scored, it attaches, new clay attaches to it beautifully. It's important when you're massing in the head that you do the neck at the same time. For the face, I use a little softer clay for the outer layer. So I want a stiffer clay on the inside, a little softer clay on the outside. If you're actually working from a model, it's important that you get the sternal notch to the chin, this height measurement, as far as how far out the chin is, straight down from the stern to the sternal notch. Okay. So now we're in pretty good shape to look at, basically to look at the symmetry. So what we'll do is we'll take this center line. When we cube the board, this is our center line, which we're calling the midline. So we'll take this midline right up the neck. Should intersect all the way up, divide it, dividing the face in half, and right on over the top of the head, coming on down and meeting the line on the other side. So now it's time to measure the head, chin to crown, and make sure that these are perfectly parallel. So it would be between these two. We want to take that, and that would be our chin to crown measurement. And what we have here is 8.5. So that's a very standard size cranium. This clay does shrink, so it'll end up being about an 8-inch head. Now what we want to do is measure, is begin to map the face slightly, and then we can take a depth of skull measurement. So we're going to go up about halfway from the chin to the top, and actually I could eyeball this, but if it's 8.5, I'll go up 4 1/4 and just make that our center line just above it and sort of notch that. This will behave as our bridge. From there straight back, that will be, and it should be, the deepest part of the skull. So it would be between here. We want to make sure this is parallel to the edge of the board. And the very back of the skull. If we took this straight back, be about here. And then we would measure between these two. This is just going to tell us how deep our skull is, which is 8 1/4. That's perfectly fine. The widest part of the face is different than the widest part of the skull. So how we would find those two measurements are as such. If we have the depth of the skull in place, then what we'll do is we'll go back and we'll measure between these 2 points halfway. And that halfway would be parallel to this plane, which is slightly coming back. It's not a perfect vertical. So if we find that halfway point here, I'm saying that this looks to me about halfway. If we were to cut this skull directly in half, this would be our halfway point. Does that look about right? Okay, so we would come back. This then is our jawline. So this would be the widest part of the skull itself, just above the ear, behind the halfway point. So in terms of mapping the face, we want to map the face horizontally first. So how we'll do that, because we've determined the eye line, which is halfway from chin to crown. And if we've determined the eye line, we know that the eyes go somewhere on this line. And if it's a male we're making, they'll sit right on top of this eye line. This halfway mark would intersect the eye if it was a female skull. So they'll be somewhere in this vicinity, and we can plot in the brow. We first need the eye, and then we can plot in the brow. If we have this eye line, then the brow, then we can make a determination about the hairline. And if it's a generic kind of head that you're making up from out of left field, you can determine this hairline to go as far back as you want to within reason. So we're going to put it here, because what you're going to be measuring is the distance between the brow line here and the beginning of this hairline. Because really, if you break it down just proportions of the face themselves, it's 1/3 from the hairline to the brow line, 1/3 from brow line to the nose, bottom of nose, and another 1/3 to the bottom of the chin. After we've done that, we can think about dividing the head in terms of vertically, so we know where those eyes go on that eye line. This would be 1/5, the next 1/5, the middle 1/5, the outer 1/5, and then the 4th 5th and the outer 5th here. The reason why these are important to cut the face into 5ths, the whole head actually, is because now we know that the eyes generally will fit inside these 2 inner 5ths. That's where they belong now. There's an eye's difference, there's an eye width between these 2 eyes here, and there should be an eye's width on either side of each eye. We're going to determine where the ears go. And the ears, we can generally, rule of thumb is the top of the brow. If you just take that right on back, and the bottom of the nose, just take that right on back. Let's see if we did that. So that the ears would fall right here behind the jaw. So on the back half of the skull, that's where the X marks the spots for the ears. The reason why we want to find the ears right now is because then we can find the cheekbones, and that'll enable us to sort of find the widest part of the face. So here's our nose. I'm going to bring our nose back. So now we know here's our ear. So perhaps the widest part of the head might be a tiny bit higher. X marks the spot for the widest part of the head there. And the widest part of the head here could go up just a tad to here. Okay, so if this is our ear, we know that the hole from the ear into the skull would be right about in there. Why that's important is because that will tell us that the cheekbone will come out like this and then drop in to create the top of the jaw. The socket of the eye is actually, this is also comes in and becomes this cheekbone. So this comes out. So this is our cheek bone. The widest part of the bone itself is probably right in here. It's not back next to the ear. It's out a little bit further from the ear. So this would then mean that bone is the widest part of the face. We're going to put a little spot there, and that should be the widest part of the face there, and we could do it on the other side. So everything from there would come down from there and down from here. Everything from the widest part of the skull would come in and back and taper back from there. So those are good. These are two important key widths to keep in mind. Okay, we'll pull this out. We can just add a little bit of cheek in there, and we'll make sense of this later. It's just going to tell us that that's our cheekbone, and that's our width of our face. Okay, now because we know where the eyes belong, the nose belongs, we can determine the mouth. Halfway between the bottom of the nose, put a big N here for nose, and the bottom of the chin, halfway, roughly, somewhere in here, is the bottom of the bottom lip. So the very bottom of the mouth will sit on that halfway point. Okay, now we know where things go. What we can do now is follow these outer fifth lines, the outer fifth line all the way up. All the way, because this will give us, we can think about this as the side planes of the head and skull. And this is another side plane. This is really when the head and the face drastically turns corners. The face itself is between these three fifths, right here, between here and here. From this fifth back, it's a beveling, and it's a very strong plane change right along this line coming into these three inner fifths. So we're going to make those planes changes now. And there's a bony ridge, right, that comes right down that makes a space for that muscle. And oftentimes around our temples, it's even concave in there. So we're going to just make that very evident along each side. And then right under this cheekbone, we're just going to kind of come in at an angle. Just a little bit of an angle like that. By doing that, we also will age this character. The fuller the cheeks in here, the younger the character will look. This is also where the cheek itself, the zygomatic, right here, turns the corner and makes a beeline for the nose. And it goes inward quite significantly. So it's really like almost not quite a 90 degree, but a very strong angle inward. Here's our socket. We have the eyes, they fall on top of the eye line. The brow would come like so, but the eye socket comes down, and a great big V is cut back into this outer fifth, comes down like this, comes over the inner fifth, so that they sort of look like pilot glasses. Here's our outer fifth, We cut a huge V. It's amazing how far back these V's are cut so we can have all the peripheral vision that we have. Also, the inner parts of this socket are beveled to come up thinner, so that we have a narrow bridge of the nose. We take the ball of the eye, line it up as close as we can, pull the wire through so as to get what we're not going to score and put them in permanently just yet. The relationship of the cornea, which is the furthest extension of the ball of the eye, is in right relationship to the bridge. Since the bridge isn't really going to be changing, we want to make sure that this relationship is good. So depending on your subject, anywhere between 1/4 and 1/2 an inch, you want the cornea recessed that much. So I've put in the one eye, and now I'm going to try get the other eye lined up so that it matches. Now what we're going to do is make little tiny coils and set them in all the way around the ball, and this will fill in that negative space. So now we want to make sure that we have the proper depth between the forehead, the brow ridge, and underneath the socket. So actually what we want from a profile standpoint is an angle like so. So we have clearly too much bone down there. So we're going to cut this away. We're going to just slice, I can do it like so, from the outer 5th line where the fullest extent of that cheekbone turns the corner. This is considered the flat part of the face. We're going to cut and just make this ramp, just like this. And it's just going to ease off as it goes down the face and ramp up to make that. And we'll do the same thing on the other side, trying to make it as symmetrical as we can. So now you see from the profile the orientation of top of brow, top of eye socket is this, which is what we want. The other thing what we can do at this point is to give, before we actually put the lids on the eyes, is to give a little brow ridge. Usually if it's a male, there's much more of a distinguishable brow ridge than a female. So we're going to, some brow ridges are really serious, but we're going to just give this guy something of a gentleish brow ridge, and his brow would sit right over that. It's just a little bit extra bone. The women will have a subtle one, but all men don't have it, of course, but if there's a brow ridge to be found, it would be on a male. Now, foreheads have a lot of personality. You can put in a little extra bone right up in here and in here. I think I'll go to my finer rib now. If you do that, this is a lovely way to kind of integrate. We're going to actually draw in the eyes. We're going to remember, right, this is our eye line here. So we're going to carry that on right across the eyeball. Right across the eyeball. What we put in terms of that inner coil of clay around the ball of the eye will act as this little muscle in the corner of the eye, which should be right here. And so we're going to draw in the eye and include that as the corner. So in other words, our eye will be sort of like so. We'll include this corner into. One of the things about eyes that's good to remember is that the outer corner here is higher than the inner corner of the eye, just what you see of the eyeball itself. It's also a good idea to do a little indentation along this bottom lid so that you can keep this a nice little shelf. It's terrible when you get a very, very thin lower eyelid or upper eyelid. It just doesn't look like, well, it doesn't read as skin would, and it needs to be able to catch the light that comes down from the above. So this is just a filler, which is pushing this down into that negative space of the socket. Very strong plane change between where the socket starts and this ramp up to the nose. So we want to keep that always in mind. Then the bottom lid just follows the orb of the eye all the way around. The eyes are so important that I end up spending often days and days on the eyes, just getting them exactly right. It's getting the planes right, getting the expression, getting the focal length correct. All right, so that's our bottom lid. The top lid now, use sort of moist clay for this. The top lid's going to be a thicker coil that's a little bit tapered on one side. Now start from that corner, come up, and down and over top of that lower coil. You want that upper lid to be a bit thicker than the lower lid. And we're going to do another coil to fill in back in here. Here's a rule of thumb, and this is true a great deal of the time, and that's this upper lid arcs early, so it would arc right in about here, the arrow right in about here, generally speaking, and then swoop down and create that beautiful arcing coming down. Whereas the lower lid arcs much later on, arcs about like here, and then swings up to make a higher corner than the inside corner. So this comes out relatively gently, down, gently, and then up. Big turn right here. Usually the lower lid is not curved as much as the upper lid. It's a gentler curve. This corner should be a little higher than your inside corner. Oftentimes, if there isn't an angle, like this has a good orientation, top lid to bottom lid along this angle. Once you have the lids of the eyes on, to make it interesting for yourself, now's the time where you can introduce a narrative into the situation if you want to go there, which makes it sort of you feel sort of like you're the creator of making a plot. And so eye contact or eye direction is huge in sort of suggesting narrative. So if the eyes are like so, straight ahead of you, then they tend to look a little bit frozen. If the eyes are off to one side ever so slightly, they can either be in relationship to something else, looking at something else, which you, as the viewer, don't ever really know. You just make it up. Or you can have much more of a sort of a clear focus, like the wider the eyelid goes, the more you get the feeling that they're actually looking and engaging in something. A more thoughtful eye position is when you just sort of have them looking afar but not at anything. And these are subtle, subtle kinds of things to do with where you put the iris, where you position the eyes. And of course, the closer you get to looking at anything, the closer the pupils, the iris come together, and the further away on the horizon, they sort of separate. So now is a great time where you can decide on where you want to put the eyes. So just to make this intriguing, I'm going to put the eyes off to one side, okay? The iris itself is about 1/3 of what you see of the whites of the eyes. It takes up about 1/3. So now we sort of have someone looking over to the side, which sort of makes things a bit more interesting. One thing you can do, little tricks, are if you know you're going to put the eyes in a directional way, you can lift the lid ever so slightly, because the cornea would push that lid up ever so slightly in that direction. So by doing that, it reinforces the direction where the eyes are looking. So put just a tiny bit of bulge where that cornea is, just the tiniest bit, which will also help define the direction, and then push up right on this eyelid. So the eye would be just a little bit, the lid would be just a little bit thicker right in there. I'm going to show you one quick little way to finish these eyes, because the fingers is just a little too big to get in here, but a brush works really nicely. Now, these eyeballs and these lids are only in the sockets so far all by themselves. What they need is all of this padding that create the crease. See, right now I think this guy looks quite suspicious, but we can create even more suspicion on him. First, what we'll do is we'll fill in this pad right under the brow that fills this in. This will create the seam, and it rounds on up. In. So we could create all of this in here, which is the soft tissue around the eye. The deepest hollow would be in this corner, so we'll leave a little bit of a hollow, but this would come out like so. Now the next piece we want is the nose. So we want to make a kind of a triangular piece with angled sides that comes down like that with a top plane, and we'll sort of see how far down we want to go. We're going to go right off of this bridge, and we might just cut this flat to house it. And score. We know we want to go down to there. So you can always cut the length after it's on, so it's nice to really put on that nose, keep these sides of it ramped. Hits the bridge, and then it comes down and makes this wonderful kind of angle. So almost perfect triangular cutaway right in there as the ramp from the nose hits the socket and creates that nice plane change in there. So I'm really keen on that. We'll just make this work over here on the other side too. I just love a good nose. I just love a good nose, and there's a lot of really good noses in the world. So one thing I like about a good nose is the way it jumps off of the bone. So it's all bone coming down from the bridge to about here. Right there is the end of the bone and the beginning of the cartilage. So oftentimes there's a sort of a bump here, and it falls off and then goes to the round ball of the nose here, which is oftentimes lower. Right where it is the broadest is right before it jumps off. So it would be broad and then come in and then come out again to the ball of the nose. And I'm awful keen on that too. So we're going to beef up the ball of the nose. And my most favorite sort of nose is when you can see the two pieces of cartilage which set up the ball of the nose. There's a division in between them very, very often, giving the nose a kind of a cleavage. I grew up with a woman who had an awesome nose cleavage, and I used to just look at her nose I hardly heard a thing she said. I was so interested in her nose. Now the rule of thumb is that the nostrils want to come out to the eye corners. So if we go straight up from the edge of the nostril, we will hit the eye corner. I'm going to give it just a little tiny bit more of a V. Oftentimes that nose comes in, makes a lovely V. And then we can draw in the parentheses from the nose down. We can sort of create the parentheses of the crease. The shape of the mouth totally follows the jaw. So if you look at the chin on this little guy, you'll see this rounded horseshoe. And if you could, and it's because really all of this whole jaw is a horseshoe. And it's incredibly important that the skin that you're putting on as a mouth actually incorporates about the outer third of that horseshoe curve. So we're going to put the upper lip on, and it's going to be the whole upper lip, all in one fell swoop. We're going to make something that starts about halfway out. If you're looking profile, halfway out from the back of the nostril to the end of the nose, halfway back would be about here. This is where we want that upper lip to start so that we can taper it around to give us that horseshoe. We'll tuck it underneath this nose here and just push it up into there. And then it's sort of just now what will happen, you'll push it a little bit into what would be the nostrils and then taper it from there. And what you'll end up doing is re-sculpting the very bottom of the nostril as it comes around. So you'll have to sculpt that in there. Or sort of just take out a little bit of that clay around in there. Then we know that if the bottom is halfway between the nose and the chin, the bottom of the mouth would be like so. And the middle parting of the lips, and then this would be the bottom lip here. But we're just going to cut it actually where the parting of the lips. I'm just going to cut it straight across. And get rid of this altogether. And we'll cut this up to the top line which we've drawn on a bevel. Taper it. Just cut it 45 degrees off. This is now our top lip. Can always put in a philtrum. Well, I think I'll cut it. Now our job is to put in the bottom lip. So the bottom lip is going to be right in here. I usually start with fresh clay, and I just make a coil with 2 tapered ends. As you can see, this could be a very raw form of a bottom lip, and now I'll go about trying to make that really integrated and sculpted. The first thing I think I would do is I'd just give a little bit of a middle sort of a fullness to that upper lip. Oftentimes lips are, not always, and it depends on the age of the person, but there's 3 components to the top lip. There's this form here, that hangs a little low, and it has a corresponding dip in the lower lip itself. But I love that part of a lip. Comes up, and then oftentimes there's a fullness right in here on each side of that upper lip. You want to make the peaks of that upper lip very clear. The lower lip is usually shorter than the upper lip. It isn't as wide, and it has two big forms to it, one on each side, sort of like two forms coming together. Now, not every mouth will look like that, granted, but Elvis Presley had a really good mouth. Now, if the eyes were looking dead at us, the pupil would come down probably right in here, and that would be the edge of our mouth. So we could kind of imagine that. If this is our mouth, then this would be off. This would be the dimple here, and the edge. Bottom lip tucks under that top lip. This is the edge over here. And I'll go back and clean up these lips and sculpt them. Before I do that, though, I just want to put in the supporting muscles. There's these wonderful muscles that circulate around the mouth, and they're some of my most favorite forms, so I'm going to include those. They often create a really cool shadow, so these muscle forms come down, often creating a shadow here, underneath. It comes up under that bottom lip and down here. And then, of course, last but not least, we give him a chin pad, which is just no more than, I'd say, a little button, like so, that would just put right here. So I'll take a moment to clean him up and show you what I've done. We're back, and I have cleaned him up just a little bit. So I'll show you what I've done, because I've made a few shifts in where I put things. I realized when I was talking about laying out proportion, and if you recall, it was thirds from the hairline to the brow, brow to the nose, bottom of nose to bottom of chin. And I kept looking at him and going, this isn't quite right. Well, his nose was too long, so I shortened the nose up, so you can see it a little bit better at profile. This is a hairline, brow line, nose line, chin line. So he's a bit more in proportion. Now, the other thing I was doing was when I was putting in the eyes, and this happens a lot, is when you put in a directional look to the eyes and they were coming over to the side, sometimes that can really throw you off in terms of getting them equidistant from the midline. So where they're looking, in this case they were looking over here, this eye kept drifting closer to the nose. So you have to be a little bit mindful. So what I did in order to correct that was just give him a front and center look. So he doesn't look like he's not, basically there's no iris now put in whatsoever. So I could still do that, starting with this blank look. Then I could set the iris and put in the directional eyes that I wanted to have. So that's one way you can help yourself correct if there's asymmetry in those eyes. Another thing that's really important is to keep looking at the piece from an aerial perspective and from a worm perspective, looking right up at the nostrils from underneath, because it'll really show you that depth. It'll really show you the asymmetry if one side's recessed more than the other side. It's really a good thing to be able to do that. So, given all of that, I shortened the nose, but I kept the cleavage, which is my favorite. Put a little bit of a Kirk Douglas chin on him, carried the cleavage down into the chin. And so now I could just go ahead and use my brush to clean him up. I also gave him an Adam's apple, something that is a classically male attribute. I'll make a little lake of water here. And just clean him up just a little bit. This kind of integrates everything. What I'll do now is just flesh his face out a little bit more by following the parentheses of the creases around the mouth, and we can sort of start here, come down. Now we don't want to go too low, or we don't want jowls. He's way too young for jowls. We come down like so, and just sort of fade it off. And these two coils can give you that extra tissue. We might even give a little bit more cheek above that. This is the flattest part of the face in here. Right off the ramp of the nose, right in here is the flats where the cheekbone comes and makes a beeline for that ramp of the nose. So we could give a little bit more cheek in here, a little fullness right on that, and then it'll come into the fullness right around right in here. Let me look at it in the front. So the fuller these cheeks are, probably the more youthful this fellow will look. So we don't want him to look too youthful, just lovely, kind of classically youthful. So if he's classically youthful, these fade out, these creases, they'll just fade out sort of midway down. They're always outside of the corners of the mouth. If you hear any snoring, it's my dog, Willie, keeping me company. Now we're going to begin making the ears. So knowing that the ear belongs in the X, we're going to measure that. So I take my slab and I pound it down a little bit till it's about 1/2 inch thick. And I'm going to hold it up right at this height. So I'm going to mark the bottom and the top. So now I have basically the height of the ear. So this is a way that I guess I developed in order to make matching ears. And I draw a heart shape minus the bottom. So this is my heart shape. Now I'll cut this out. Roughly a heart shape. And cut it right down the middle. Now I'll have 2 matching ears, theoretically. And we'll put one ear aside and we'll just try, well, actually what we'll do is we'll make a wedge out of this side of the heart so that the broad side is on the outside and then it wedges down kind of significantly. I think sometimes the ear isn't always right at the very top of the brow, so I'm sort of putting it at the top of the eyelid. The ear in the angle should follow the angle of the jaw. Some people have much more of a straight vertical jaw, and in that case, put the ear more vertically. Allow the ear to follow the line of the jaw. Now how I create the inside of the ear, I start by drawing, and I'm going to draw the outer big area. Take this part and connect it there, and this whole shape reminds me of a 9, so I just call that the 9 of the ear. This little flange, the tragus, comes here. Then there's this negative space that comes right down in here and makes a little reservoir right at the bottom of the tragus. This then is the lobe, and we can clean that up. So now we're going to take our little loop tool and remove some of this. Just go ahead and remove that in there. Kind of dig a little ditch. We're going to soften this edge. Then inside this negative space, this is what we're just going to do, is take some of that negative space out, leaving the tail of the 9 in there. Now the tail of this 9 actually goes and just disappears down in there, in that negative space. I'm going to just put this and add on to this outer realm of the ear, right in here. Take it right down and disappear that. Into that negative space. Then I put another little coil around that negative space. Come in from here and just connect it. Comes up and all the way down and around this reservoir. So it just circles and surrounds this negative space and comes up and sort of becomes a little bit more so that the flange can be just a bit more pronounced. The tragus, I mean. The only thing left to do besides cleaning this up is to create a little ditch. There's always a little ditch. All of the components are here except for this little ditch, which is right here, right above the negative space. And what happens is that there's a little rise just on top of that ditch of tissue, not clay, that goes to create a sort of a Y that comes down around that negative space. So we'll just integrate that. Okay. So in order to get a good matching ear over here, you want to keep referring to this, use this ear as your model, but keep looking at it from an aerial standpoint to make sure that they're on the same plane coming back on the head. The last piece about the ear is to make sure that the back is modeled like the back of an ear would be. So in an effort to clean him up, I guess I go to my very finest rib first, serrated rib, which is very small toothed, and I just love it. It's flexible, so it can fit over the arc of his head and come towards me. And I usually like to have something in the background so that I do get a good edge, so I can see the edge of him really well. After all of his features are pretty much on there, then I just want to establish the finer points. Like if I want a hollow under that cheek, that would come in here. If I want those jaw bones to be a little bit more pronounced, I come in just a little bit under. I love this particular edge, the temporal ridge coming down in a little low, then the cheekbone, then the Hollywood hollow of that cheek under that cheekbone so that they match. And then the end result, I took a little bit more, I cleaned the angles of the jaw up so that they're very clearly articulated. First of all, this gives him a more masculine look. If it was a female jaw, this would be a thinner jaw and just kind of more gently rounded. And so here we'll clean him up a little bit more. There's a soft brush that just barely hits the surface of the clay. And then there's this very stiff brush, and this actually moves a lot of clay around. I don't touch his eyes with this brush, as it would just squish out. It's important when you put on eyebrows or anything like that, sideburns or whatever it is, that you put first the mound on and erase all seams, and then come in with the brow. So if this was to be my brow, I'd want to kind of just add a little bit of clay, since he already has a pretty big ridge. So then on the very end, which takes days usually in the studio, but I come in with this wonderful burnishing rib. This really can smooth. So I'll continue cleaning him up and let you see how he could look, and then we'll call it a day. Well, thanks for watching. I hope it was helpful. It was fun making them. Take care.